what about the past 75 years? Let's talk about it.
On November 2nd, 1917, Britain's Foreign Secretary, Arthur Balfour, wrote a letter that would set off a conflict still being fought more than 100 years later.
I feel like the most common rebuttal in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is always, but wait, what about the past 75 years? I'm originally from the United States, and 3 years ago, I decided to move to Israel. I live there. I know what it's like, and I've known what it's like since the age of 6 years old. I've been to every corner in that country, east, west, north, and south. And I'm here to tell you what life is like there. This Israeli-Palestinian conflict is so deep-rooted and multi-layered and complex that you can't necessarily pinpoint it to one event, two specific events, because we all know one thing. Prior to 1948, pre-biblical times, there were several groups of people living in that area of the world. And two of those groups were Muslims and Jews.
Two populations lived under the Mandate of Palestine, Arab and Jewish.
Hello.
Both of them considered Palestinians.
That's right, Muslims and Jews lived together on the same land that we are discussing through this conflict. And before you say who was there first, who was there second, we don't know the answer to that question, but what we do know is that before 1948, for the establishment of the State of Israel, these groups of people lived together side by side. They were there physically, geographically, on that land. What exactly was happening in Eastern Europe, not just to Jewish people, but to many Jews in the world, which led them to having to flee and escape just to find a way home? The Holocaust. I don't feel the need to tell you what the Holocaust was, and I definitely do not feel the need to tell you that it actually happened, because we know this to be very true. Lots and lots of Jewish people had to flee Eastern Europe because Hitler and his regime were trying to essentially kill every living Jew possible. Many went to different parts of the world, and many ended up in the plot of land that we are currently discussing and have been discussing for such a long time. Jewish people wanted a place just to be Jewish, just to live, just to have a life, just to feel accepted, just to be. The Independence War of 1948 was the result of the Jewish people having to defend their right to exist, because right before they arrived, they were not allowed to exist. The ideology that was spreading throughout the world was that we should not exist, which led to the Independence Day War, where Israel, as the underdogs, who had absolutely no chance, ended up winning and establishing the State of Israel.
In 1947, the mandate expired, and the UN decided to split the land into independent Jewish and Arab states. The Jews accepted the UN resolution and called their state Israel. The Arab world, however, rejected the two-state plan, and right after the last British soldiers departed, attacked their newly independent neighbor. After the war, Jordan annexed the West Bank, and Egypt took over the Gaza Strip, which were both assigned to the Arabs as part of the partition plan. Neither country saw a need to set up an independent state in these areas. As a result, an Arab state did not materialize in the former British Mandate of Palestine.
This war didn't happen anywhere else. That wasn't the only place Jewish people ended up. They ended up in South America, they ended up in Africa, they ended up in Australia, they ended up in parts of Europe. Why wasn't there a war there? If the same cause and effect had been true from that part of the world to every other one, we would have seen lots of different Independence Day wars. 1967 is also a really important date. The Yom Kippur War. Israel caught blindsided by Egypt, by Syria, by Jordan, by Iraq. What are the odds that Israel comes out on top again? Israel's army, Israel's unity, Israel's strength, Israel's resilience, the Jewish people's history of what they had to escape from in the past, all led to this sense of togetherness, mishpacha, family, that we could never allow another group of people to choose to wipe us off the planet because of who we are. We must defend ourselves. There is no alternative. And in 1967, Israel came out on top again by defending itself from people who did not want them to exist. About a decade later, in 1977, we are now at the Camp David Accords, the official peace treaty between Israel and Egypt. Now, I find it very funny that there are a lot of people who claim that Israel is never willing to negotiate peace. It's interesting because the Camp David Accords was the official peace treaty between Egypt and Israel, and 10 years prior to that peace treaty, the people who initiated the Six-Day War and Yom Kippur War attack on Israel was Egypt. And so 10 years prior to this peace treaty, we were getting attacked by the exact people where 10 years later we were making peace with them. How can you make the claim that Israel would never be willing to negotiate peace, even with the people who directly attacked them in the previous war? Now, I'm not a Middle East expert and I never have been, but what I do know is that there are specific times in history, like the ones I mentioned before, that are crucial to understanding the big picture overview of the past 75 years of Israel and Palestine. There were many other peace treaty offerings made by Israel to the Palestinians between these years, which I didn't even mention, and I don't need to get into those, and they were all declined. I want to mention this very important thing because when I was in Israel at the age of 6, 7, and 8 in 2001, 2002, and 2003, my family spent some time in southern Israel in the desert with a group of people called the Bedouins. They are a nomadic group of people who don't have the same access to resources as others in Israel, and my family spent some time volunteering with them because down in the south there were chemicals seeping into their drinking water. And so we went down there to help build them a medical facility because people were getting sick and ill due to drinking dirty water. These people aren't Jewish and they speak Arabic, yet at such an early age, my family allowed me to get exposed to people who were different than me, living in the same country, but maybe on different terms. I didn't think different of who they are because of their religion, I didn't think different of who they are because of their culture, and I didn't think different of who they are because of their language. And when I was in high school and partly throughout college, one of my really good friends was Muslim. I've celebrated Ramadan at his house, he celebrated Passover and Shabbat at mine. We never let our cultural, household, and religious differences get in the way of our friendship and how we valued each other as human beings. What was instilled in me at 6 years old from my parents building that medical facility for the Bedouins is the same approach that I had with my Muslim friend with me in high school, and anyone else really in the world, Muslim, Jewish, Christian, you name it. I look for people who are kind and show love and respect me for who I am. Those Bedouins who I was helping build a medical facility for didn't want me dead because I was Jewish, and my friend in high school and college didn't want me dead because I was Jewish, and nor did I want him dead because he was Muslim. I live in Israel. I've been living there for 3 years. It's a melting pot. There are people from all walks of life who live in Israel. Jewish, Muslim, Christian, Mormon, atheist, gay, straight, you name it. It is a place where all walks of life live together. I know this to be true. I live there. I'm just speaking to you about my experience through history as I know it to be true. The 1948 War of Independence has absolutely nothing to do with ethnic cleansing. It was about Jewish people trying to find a place to live and be accepted so that they could put their bags down just like I did 3 years ago and build a home and a future. However, due to conflict, they had to fight for that freedom instead of negotiating it accordingly. This Israeli-Palestinian conflict doesn't have a specific starting point, and it for sure does not have a finish line. There is too much that has gone on since the creation of Earth and where we are today to understand exactly who started what, who was where first, what about the past 75 years? We actually have to go back to previous pre-biblical times to understand the beginning of what we are seeing today. And if 1948 is where this discussion starts, the past 75 years has been an attempt, an ugly one, at trying to find a way for Jewish people, for Israel as a Jewish state, the only Jewish state in the world, to have its right to exist. Sometimes I think about those days with the Bedouins in the desert, just communicating with them as if I understood their Arabic or as if they understood my English. We were just being people, all smiles, having fun, sharing times together. Or my friend in high school, where we would enjoy each other's company and we never let our differences get in the way of how we looked at each other as people. I hope for that to be the case one day between Israelis and Palestinians. I hope that one day there will be no evil between the conversation. And while there is evil that lives in between, the conversation is not worth having. That's the truth.